Appalachian folk medicine was formed out of a great mixing of cultures, beliefs, and medical practices from all over the world. This alternative healthcare infrastructure became a crucial way to survive for early settlers, those living through the Civil War and Reconstruction, and even into today. Unfortunately, these folk traditions have to be implemented where poverty lives. The traditions of Appalachian folk medicine came together from a merging of cultures and both new and old ways of treating illness, disease, and other medical problems. The earliest of these foundations for folk medicine can be found in the first visitors to the New World of America, the Spanish and their African slaves. While many think of English settlers being the first to try to settle the New World, the truth is it was the Spanish and the African slaves they brought with them. In the early 16th century, Spanish explorers and conquistadors ventured out into the brand new realms of South America, North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean. They brought with them doctors that were brought up in the humoral medical belief system, a medical system that both the ancient Greeks and Romans subscribed to. These beliefs, while wildly inaccurate in many ways, did serve a great purpose as the doctors could successfully deal with combat wounds, which were a large part of life back then. They contributed this aspect of medicine to what would eventually become an early form of Appalachian folk medicine. A famous expedition by Panfilo de Narvaez would become a catalyst for the mixing of the old ways and the new ways of medicine in America. In 1528, Narvaez and his group of conquistador companions would be blown off course on their way to Mexico. They would end up in Florida, where half of the party tried to make it to Mexico on foot. Many of Narvaez's group would be killed as they trekked through the Panhandle into modern-day Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Only 4 of the original group would live through the ordeal. They were able to do this by helping to heal various Native Americans on their way to Mexico. Thus, 2 branches of medicine, Old World Spanish and New World Native American, were combined to make new techniques for both parties to use. As other countries saw the vast opportunities in the New World, they flocked to America. As the 17th century began, British colonies were mostly funded by large venture capitalist companies, and thus they needed a workforce to help produce some sort of crop that they could export to the Old World to make their American ventures successful. So they found both a crop and a workforce. The crop was tobacco, which the British saw as having multiple medicinal benefits. Their workforce were indentured slaves. Many of them, up to a third of the workforce in places, were Irish. These Irish indentured slaves happened to be a combination of debtors and exiled healers. Every clan in Ireland had a healer, and after the British forced many of them out of their own country, they ended up in America. This unique circumstance led to an even greater mixing of medicinal cultures in the New World. The Irish brought their folk medicine to the Native Americans, which combined with the previous influences of the Spanish. It spread like wildfire into the Appalachian Mountains for hundreds of years, as Irish indentured servants not only shared their medicinal traditions, but often intermarried with Native Americans and other indentured servants. Some particular influences the Irish brought into Appalachian folk medicine are based on how non-tangible things, such as the moon, the zodiac, spiritualism, and even significant celestial events can affect a person's health. As more European settlers came to the New World, they experienced various diseases and illnesses they had never seen before. In response to this new influx of medical problems, they looked to the teachings of local Native American tribes. These teachings were based on medicinal plants and living a life that is in balance with the ecosystem around you. Many Appalachian folk remedies come from this joining of cultures. Now that we know how the beginnings of Appalachian folk medicine formed, what types of medicine formed early Appalachian folk medicine? The first type is called seasoning. Seasoning is another word for adaptation to a new environment. For example, if you're someone who stays inside most of the time in the air conditioning, then you most likely won't be able to all of a sudden spend 12 hours a day outside in the heat of the sun without experiencing some negative effects. The same situation was applied to early Appalachian settlers who were from Europe. See, Europe, for all the political strife and power grabs, is an extremely forgiving climate. In Appalachia, both the weather and the terrain can be extremely unforgiving. Settlers soon found that they were having unexplained medical problems that they had never experienced before. It wasn't until the Native Americans stepped in that they told them they needed to season their bodies. In other words, they needed to get their bodies acclimated to the weather and terrain before fully immersing themselves in the ecosystem. Another type of folk medicine was plantation folk medicine. There would be a massive amount of incomplete information on Appalachian folk medicine if the various healing traditions of slaves were not taken into account. They helped provide another branch of medicine that took root and combined to create Appalachian folk medicine. The adaptation of African culture into the New World through slaves is fascinating. As African slaves went from indentured servants to literal slaves capable of being purchased, they lost independence as a group and a culture. One aspect of their lives that they could take back for themselves was their medical health. While some slave owners saw the use of African traditions to treat medical conditions as barbaric and refused to allow them, other slave owners allowed their slaves to take control of their health. Because of this small bit of independence they were given, they were able to take their old traditions and mix them in with their new environment and eventually the culture of the slave owners. A large portion of African medicine centered around the belief that if your spirit was sick, then so was your physical body. There could be many causes of this sickness, so they believed that you should have healthy relationships and try to avoid jealousy and anger to protect your soul and body from illness and disease. In many cases, this African medicine joined with other cultural roots to continue to form what would eventually become Appalachian folk medicine. The third type of medicine is plant medicine. The Civil War was brutal from beginning to end, but often we forget that more so than on the battlefield, this war was fought off of the battlefield, which was certainly the case when it came to Confederate troops. As history tells us, the Union had an excess of factories compared to the Confederacy. They could use these factories for many things, but specifically they could use them for medicines and medicinal tools and instruments. The Confederacy had no such access to any modern medicines because they did not have the capability of producing them. Because of this, the Confederacy had to go back in time and start using plant-based medicine again in order to keep their soldiers healthy and fighting. Instances of the use of red oak bark as a disinfectant, wahoo root bark as skin protection, nightshade for pain, pleurisy root for malaria were all found in every medical tent in the South. In the wake of the devastation of the Civil War, those left disenfranchised in the South, both former slaves and poor whites, were forced to continue using these herbal medicines to stay healthy. This was sort of the last domino that led to the unofficial creation of Appalachian folk medicine as a distinct type of treatment for ailments in the region. So now that we've got a good background for what Appalachian folk medicine is and where it came from, let's dive into some specifics about what actually constitutes Appalachian folk medicine. Appalachian medicine is the result of hundreds of years of the mixing of cultures, religions, medicines, and beliefs wrapped up into one functioning set of medical traditions. It is more than just the sum of the health of all your physical body parts. It is not only physical, but also mental and spiritual in nature. Appalachians focus on the blood as being the most vital aspect of survival. You can have clean blood or dirty blood, good blood or bad blood. Your blood can be changed by physical factors, environmental factors, or celestial factors. The variables seem infinite at times. As the seasons change, so does your blood. During the winter, it shrinks and thickens, and during the spring, it begins to thin and spread further throughout the body. But with this renewal of blood in the spring, new issues can develop in the blood. To remedy this, the use of sassafras tea, red clover, and other laxatives are used to purify the blood before summer. Blood is the major player in Appalachian folk medicine, as it determines many of the prognoses and treatments involved. If blood is so important, then how is it classified in Appalachian folk medicine? Well, to start, there are many different types of blood states that your body can be at baseline. And likewise, there are illnesses or personality traits that are attributed to them. For example, you can be high blood, which means you have high blood pressure. You can be low blood, which deals with low blood pressure, low sugar, or low hydration. You can be thin blood, which can be caused by heat or alcohol. You can be thick blood, which refers to high blood pressure, but also someone who is generally tired and lacks energy. You can have sweet blood, which relates to diabetes, but is also associated with feelings of self-importance and loner qualities. You can have sour blood, who are people who have a tendency to have rashes, hives, and food allergies, which is also related to panic attacks and anxieties. You can have bitter blood, which is considered to be full of parasites, considered to have a low nutritional value, and these people are usually bitter and in search of revenge. You can have salty blood, which refers to low moisture and stagnant nutrients in the body. These people tend to be constantly annoyed and antisocial. You can have hot blood, which leads to fever and nervous energy. You can have cold blood, which means inflammation and stiff joints are experienced in these types of people. Those are the main 10 blood states of Appalachian folk medicine. At the end of the day, humans are defined by the cultural roots that they put down. Oftentimes, in a place so massive as America, where things come from can be forgotten. In this case of Appalachian folk medicine, it is important to know that it was born out of the mixing of many different cultures and belief systems. It came together in the New World and spread to regions where it was needed most. This folk medicine mostly hung around those who were poor or lacked ways to take control of their own lives. That's where this medicine is most helpful. For this reason, we have seen this type of alternative medicine settle down in its own way with the people of the rural areas of Appalachia. They were and still are the people who need an efficient but practical healthcare system.